The shot that rang out across the dusty street of Kingman, Arizona Territory, in 1879, wasn't meant for Eleanor Richards, but it may as well have been. The stray bullet from the saloon brawl whizzed past her ear, close enough to make her new life flash before her eyes as she stood frozen on the boardwalk, clutching her carpetbag with white knuckles. She'd traveled all the way from Boston to this remote desert town to take possession of her late uncle's ranch, and within her first hour, she'd nearly met the same fate as him. Eleanor had barely caught her breath when strong hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her to safety between two buildings just as another shot splintered the wooden post where she'd been standing. "Madam, unless you're aiming to meet your maker today, I suggest you keep your head down," said a deep voice, rough as the terrain surrounding them. She found herself staring up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin, piercing blue eyes, and a dust-covered Stetson. His face was partially hidden behind several days' worth of beard, but there was no disguising the hard lines of someone who'd seen his share of trouble. I didn't," Eleanor stammered, still trembling from the near miss. "First day in Kingman." He didn't wait for her answer. "Thought so. Town's usually peaceful enough, but seems you've arrived during a disagreement between the Tolson boys and some cattle drivers passing through." He peered around the corner. "I'm Kyle Irwin, by the way. Most folks call me Irwin." "Eleanor Richards," she managed, straightening her travel-rumpled skirts. "I've come to claim Rocking R Ranch." "My uncle Richard Richards." Kyle's eyebrows shot up. "Old Rich was your uncle," Eleanor nodded. "He wrote to me about needing help with the ranch. When I didn't hear back, I wrote to the local authorities, only to learn he'd passed. As his only living relative, I've inherited the property." Kyle let out a low whistle. "Madam, with all due respect, you might have been safer facing those bullets than what awaits you at Rocking R." "Whatever do you mean?" "Your uncle's ranch has gone to seed these past months. The cattle have scattered, buildings need repair," and he hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "There's the matter of the Callahan brothers. They've had their eye on that land since before your uncle passed." Eleanor's chin lifted. "Well, they can't have it. The deed's in my name now." Kyle's expression shifted from disbelief to something resembling reluctant admiration. "You're either the bravest woman I've met or the most foolish." When the gunfire finally ceased, he stepped back onto the street, glancing both ways. "Come on. I'll take you to the ranch, but I can't promise you'll want to stay once you see it." The ride to Rocking R was silent except for the creak of the wagon and the occasional directions Kyle offered. Eleanor studied him as he drove the way he sat tall in the seat, eyes constantly scanning the horizon, one hand always near his holstered revolver. He wasn't what she'd call handsome in the refined Boston sense, but there was something compelling about his weathered face and the quiet confidence he exuded. As they crested a rise, Kyle pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is, Rocking R Ranch." Eleanor's heart sank as she took in the dilapidated buildings, broken fences, and empty corrals. Her uncle's letters had painted a picture of a thriving cattle operation, not this abandoned shell. "It's worse than I imagined," she whispered. "Your uncle was sick longer than folks realized," Kyle said quietly. "Tried to keep up appearances in town, but out here." He gestured at the neglected property. "Last few months he couldn't manage. The hands drifted off when pay stopped coming." "Why didn't anyone help him?" "Rich was a proud man, kept to himself." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "And there were those who preferred to see him fail." As they approached the main house, Eleanor noticed movement in the corral. 3 horses, thin but alive, and nearby, a small herd of cattle. "I thought you said the cattle scattered." "Most did. These are the ones I managed to round up and bring back." Eleanor turned to him, surprised. "You've been looking after my uncle's stock," Kyle shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just seemed the right thing to do. Couldn't stand seeing good animals go wild or stolen. Been coming by when I could between jobs. What is it you do, Mr. Irwin? Bit of everything. Ranch hand, tracker, occasional deputy when Sheriff Dawson needs an extra gun. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Lately, I've been helping the Millers spread with their troublesome herd. As Eleanor climbed down, the front door of the ranch house burst open and a young boy of about 10 came charging out, brandishing a stick like a sword. "Get off this property," the boy shouted. "I'm warning you." Kyle dismounted with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. "Easy there, Thomas. This lady owns this ranch now. She's Rich's niece." The boy lowered his stick, eyes wide as he took in Eleanor's city clothes and proper hat. "You're Miss Richards." "I am," Eleanor said, bending slightly to meet his eye level. "And who might you be?" "Thomas Moore, madam. My pa worked for your uncle before he got sick. Pa died in a stampede last year, and Mr. Richards let me stay on doing odd jobs." His chin lifted proudly. "I've been watching the place since he passed." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion. This child had been protecting her property while she'd been unaware of her uncle's death for months. "Well, Thomas, I'm very grateful for your service. Would you show me around my new home?" The interior of the ranch house was Spartan, but had once been well kept. Dust lay thick on the furniture, and the kitchen showed signs of a bachelor's neglect, but the bones of the place were solid. Thomas proudly showed her the root cellar stocked with preserves and potatoes, the bedroom her uncle had apparently been preparing for her arrival, and the small office where the ranch accounts were kept. "Your uncle was teaching me my letters," Thomas said, pointing to a slate on the kitchen table. "Said everyone should know how to read, even ranch hands." Eleanor smiled at the boy. "He was right. Perhaps we can continue your lessons." Hope brightened Thomas's face. "Does that mean you're staying, Miss Richards? You ain't gonna sell to the Callahans?" "I'm staying," Eleanor said, with more conviction than she actually felt. "This is my home now." Later, after Thomas had shown her the outbuildings and Kyle had brought her luggage inside, they sat on the porch as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured. "In Boston, the buildings block most of the sunset." Kyle nodded. "It's what keeps most of us here despite the hardships, that and the freedom." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Richards, I don't mean to intrude, but have you given any thought to how you'll manage this place?" Eleanor sighed. "Honestly, no. When my uncle wrote asking for help, I was eager for a change. Teaching at a girls' school in Boston was respectable but stifling. Uncle Richard's letters made ranching sound like an adventure." She gestured at the run-down property. "I didn't expect this. Ranching's hard work even for those born to it. For a city woman alone, I'm not entirely helpless, Mr. Irwin," Eleanor interrupted. "I may not know much about cattle, but I can learn. I'm educated, capable, and determined." "Education won't stop rustlers or fix fences," Kyle said bluntly. "You need hands, good men who know the business. And where would I find these men?" "You said yourself the workers left when my uncle couldn't pay." Kyle was silent for a long moment. "I could help for a spell. Got some time between jobs, and I owe your uncle that much." "You knew him well." Kyle's gaze drifted to the darkening horizon. "He gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I rode for him years back before striking out on my own." Eleanor studied him. "Why would you help me now? You don't know me." "Let's just say I'd rather see you succeed than watch the Callahans take over this land." He stood, settling his hat on his head. "I'll be back tomorrow." "We can talk terms then." As Kyle rode away, Thomas emerged from the house with a lamp. "Mr. Irwin's a good man," the boy said. "Best tracker in the territory. They say he can read sign like other folks read books." "Is that so?" Eleanor took the lamp, grateful for its warm glow against the rapidly falling night. "And what else should I know about Mr. Irwin?" Thomas scratched his head. "Well, he don't talk much, but when he does, folks listen. He's fast with a gun but doesn't draw unless he has to." And the boy lowered his voice conspiratorially. "They say he once tracked a gang of outlaws clear to Mexico and brought them all back single-handed." Eleanor smiled. "That sounds like quite the tale. It's true, ask anyone in town." Thomas yawned widely. "He'll help you get the ranch back proper, Miss Richards. You'll see." That night, lying in her uncle's prepared but unused guest room, Eleanor tried to reconcile her expectations with reality. She'd come west seeking purpose and adventure, yes, but also escaping the suffocating propriety of Boston society and an unwanted suitor her parents had practically selected. Now, faced with the enormity of restoring a failing ranch, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Yet as she drifted to sleep, it was Kyle Irwin's steady blue eyes and cautious offer of help that followed her into her dreams, not thoughts of the challenge ahead. The rooster's crow jolted Eleanor awake at dawn. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place the unfamiliar ceiling above her or the hard mattress beneath her back. Then yesterday's events rushed back the journey, the gunfight, the dilapidated ranch, and the taciturn cowboy who'd appointed himself her temporary guardian. She dressed quickly in the most practical of the clothes. She'd brought a simple skirt and shirtwaist that would have been considered underdressed for even a casual day in Boston. After arranging her hair in a simple knot, she ventured into the kitchen to find Thomas already there, awkwardly attempting to cook breakfast over the wood stove. "Good morning," she said, startling the boy so that he nearly dropped the cast iron skillet. "Miss Richards, didn't hear you get up." He looked embarrassed. "I was trying to fix something to eat before starting chores." Eleanor surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye. While she'd never been required to cook in Boston, with their household staff handling such matters, she'd often spent time in the kitchen learning from their cook, much to her mother's dismay. "Why don't I handle breakfast while you show me what needs to be done around here?" she suggested, taking the skillet from him. By the time Kyle arrived an hour later, Eleanor had made a serviceable meal of biscuits and bacon, fed the chickens Thomas showed her, and was studying her uncle's account books with growing concern. The ranch's finances were in far worse shape than the building's, with debts to the general store, the feed supplier, and the bank in Kingman. "Morning," Kyle called, removing his hat as he entered the kitchen. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Eleanor in her work clothes, hair already escaping its pins as she bent over the ledgers. "You're up early." "There's much to do," she replied, pushing a plate toward him. "Please help yourself. Thomas and I have already eaten." Kyle accepted the plate with a nod of thanks. "Heard anything from the Callahans yet?" "Should I have?" "Word travels fast in these parts. Stagecoach driver probably mentioned your arrival to someone in town, who told someone else, who told one of the Callahans' hands." Kyle took a bite of biscuit, eyebrows raising in surprise at finding it edible. "They'll be sniffing around soon enough. What exactly do these Callahans want with my uncle's land? Their ranch must be much larger if they're as prosperous as you suggest." "Water rights," Kyle said simply. "Your uncle's property controls access to Stone Creek, the only reliable water source in this section during the dry months. The Callahans have been trying to buy or bully their way into those rights for years." Eleanor frowned. "They can't simply take what isn't theirs." Kyle's laugh held no humor. "Madam out here might often makes right. The law's spread thin and a woman alone." He didn't finish the thought. "I'm not alone. I have Thomas," and she hesitated. "You said you would help, at least temporarily." Kyle studied her over his coffee cup. "I did. But you should know what you're getting into. Even with help, bringing this place back won't be easy or cheap. I have some savings, Eleanor said. Not much, but perhaps enough to hire a few hands and make essential repairs. Money won't last long if the cattle aren't producing. Kyle pushed his empty plate away. First thing we need is a roundup. Find out exactly how many head are still on your land and bring them in. Is that difficult? With enough men, no. With just me and the boy, he shrugged. It'll take time, but we can start today. By mid-morning, Eleanor had exchanged her skirt for a pair of her uncle's trousers, much to Kyle's obvious shock and Thomas's delight. You can't expect me to ride side-saddle through brush and gullies, she'd said when Kyle's eyes had nearly popped from his head at her appearance. And I certainly can't help with the roundup from the porch. Miss Richards, it's not proper, Mr. Irwin. I left proper behind in Boston. I'm a rancher now. Despite his misgivings, Kyle had to admit that Eleanor was a quick learner. Her riding skills were basic but adequate, and she listened carefully to his instructions about approaching cattle, using the terrain to guide them, and the signals cowboys used to communicate across distances. They'd managed to locate and begin herding a small group of about 20 cattle toward the ranch when Thomas, who'd been riding ahead, came galloping back over a rise. "Callahan's," he shouted. "Coming this way," Kyle cursed under his breath. "Miss Richards, stay behind me. Let me do the talking." 3 riders appeared, moving deliberately toward them. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, expensively dressed in a black coat despite the heat, with a silver-trimmed hat and matching pistols at his hips. His companions were clearly hired hands, rough-looking men with watchful eyes. "Well, well," the leader called as they approached. "If it isn't Kyle Irwin playing cowboy again. Heard you might be out this way." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, eyes narrowing at her unconventional attire. "And this must be Richard's niece. Augustus Callahan, madam, at your service." Eleanor didn't like the way his eyes lingered on her, as if assessing a piece of property rather than greeting a person. "Mr. Callahan, I understand you've had an interest in my uncle's ranch. Direct, aren't you?" Callahan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, I've made your uncle several generous offers over the years. I'd be happy to extend the same courtesy to you, save you the trouble of trying to revive this operation." He gestured dismissively at the small herd they'd gathered. "That's very considerate, but I'm not interested in selling," Eleanor replied coolly. Callahan's smile tightened. "Miss Richards, forgive my bluntness, but ranching is no occupation for a woman alone. The work is hard, the elements harsh, and there are dangers a city lady might not anticipate." "Is that a friendly warning or a threat, Augustus?" Kyle asked quietly, his hand resting casually near his revolver. Callahan laughed. "Now, Irwin, don't be uncivilized. I'm merely offering Miss Richards some advice and an opportunity. The bank in Kingman holds several notes on this property. I could settle those debts as part of my purchase offer." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "How would you know about my uncle's debts unless you'd been making inquiries? It's a small territory, Miss Richards. Word gets around." Callahan tipped his hat. "Think on my offer. I'll call at the ranch in a few days to discuss terms." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following close behind. "I don't like him," Thomas declared once they were out of earshot. "Nor do I," Eleanor agreed, watching the retreating riders. "He seems very confident that I'll sell." Kyle's expression was grim. "Callahan usually gets what he wants, one way or another." "Well, he won't get my ranch," Eleanor said firmly. "Now, shall we continue our roundup?" Over the next several days, Kyle, Thomas, and Eleanor worked from dawn until dusk, gradually locating and bringing in more of the scattered cattle. Kyle proved to be a patient teacher, showing Eleanor the basics of ranch operation, how to mend fences, care for livestock, and recognize the signs of illness in cattle. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied with their progress, they would sit on the porch while Eleanor read aloud to Thomas, continuing his education as she'd promised. Often, Kyle would remain after the boy went to bed, sharing stories of the territory or listening as Eleanor described her life in Boston. "I can't imagine it," he admitted one night, a week after her arrival. "All those fancy parties and rules about who can speak to whom and when." Eleanor laughed. "It's ridiculous when you say it aloud, yet I lived that way for 24 years without questioning it." She gazed at the star-filled sky. "Out here, everything feels more real, more immediate." "Including the dangers," Kyle reminded her. "Callahan will be back soon with his offer, and I'll refuse it again," Kyle sighed. "Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "Callahan doesn't take rejection well. If he can't buy you out legally, he might try other tactics." "Such as cutting fences, stampeding your cattle, damming the creek upstream, or hiring men to frighten you into leaving." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. "I won't be bullied, Kyle." He studied her face in the lantern light, noting the determination in her eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw. "No, I don't believe you will be," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean he won't try." The next morning, they awoke to find 2 of their reclaimed cattle dead near the creek, bullet holes clearly visible in their sides. "It's starting," Kyle said grimly as they examined the carcasses. "This is Callahan's way of sending a message." Eleanor swallowed hard, fighting nausea at the senseless waste of life. "Can we prove he did this?" "No. His men would be careful not to be seen." Kyle knelt by the creek examining the ground. 3 riders came in after midnight based on the dew patterns on these tracks. He pointed to hoofprints Eleanor could barely discern. "They'll have an alibi ready if the sheriff asks." "Then what can we do?" Kyle stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Start night watches. Keep the herd closer to the house where we can see them, and hire more hands. We need eyes everywhere." "With what money?" "We've barely rounded up half the cattle, and I'm already dipping into my savings just to feed us and buy supplies." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I know some men, good cowboys who might work for a share of the profits instead of wages, at least to start." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest. "You do that? Find men willing to take such a risk? For you?" "Yes." The simple declaration hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Later that day, Kyle rode to town to send telegrams to potential hands, while Eleanor and Thomas continued repairs on the barn. They'd made significant progress on the roof when the sound of approaching horses made Eleanor pause. Looking down from her perch on the ladder, she saw Augustus Callahan and his men riding into the yard. "Stay up here," she told Thomas quietly. "If there's trouble, run for the house and get my uncle's rifle from above the fireplace." The boy nodded, eyes wide as Eleanor descended to meet the visitors. "Miss Richards," Callahan called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Hard at work, I see." "Mr. Callahan," she replied coolly. "I wasn't expecting you so soon. I happened to be passing by." His smile was wolfish as he surveyed her work clothes and the hammer in her hand. "Playing rancher seems to agree with you, though I wonder how long the novelty will last." Eleanor set the hammer down deliberately. "This isn't a game to me, Mr. Callahan. This is my home and livelihood now." "Indeed," he raised an eyebrow. "I heard about your cattle. Terrible business that. Wolves, perhaps." "Wolves that can shoot straight through the heart, I think not." Callahan's smile never wavered. "The territory can be dangerous for those unfamiliar with its ways." "I've come to renew my offer, $15,000 for the entire property. A generous sum, given its current condition." Eleanor had done enough research in her uncle's papers to know the land was worth at least twice that, primarily because of the water rights. "Not interested, Mr. Callahan." His expression hardened. "Miss Richards, I'm trying to be reasonable. That water running through your property feeds my southern pastures. Without guaranteed access, my cattle suffer." "My uncle's agreement allowing your cattle to drink from the creek still stands," Eleanor countered. "I have no intention of revoking water rights for thirsty animals. Written agreements can be changed, especially when ownership transfers." Callahan stepped closer, invading her space. "A woman alone might find it difficult to enforce such terms." Eleanor stood her ground, though her heart hammered. "I'm not alone, Mr. Callahan, and I'm not selling." For a moment his eyes blazed with anger, then he seemed to regain control. "Very well. Perhaps you'll reconsider after you've had more time to experience the challenges of ranch life." He touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Good day, Miss Richards." As they rode away, Thomas scrambled down the ladder. "You sure told him, Miss Richards." Eleanor released a shaky breath. "I'm not sure that was wise, Thomas. I think I've just made an enemy." "You already had one," came Kyle's voice from behind them. He'd returned in time to witness the confrontation from a distance. "Callahan was never going to be your friend." "Did you find men willing to work for us?" Eleanor asked, changing the subject. Kyle nodded. "3 cowboys will arrive by week's end. They're good men, I've ridden with them before. They'll work for room, board, and a share of the profits when we sell cattle." Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Kyle. I don't know how I would manage this without your help." His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond employer and hired hand. "You'd find a way, Eleanor Richards. You're stronger than you know." The arrival of the new hands, Hank, Dusty, and Miguel, transformed the atmosphere at Rocking R. Suddenly, the work that had seemed overwhelming became manageable. The men were experienced cowboys who knew cattle and respected Kyle's judgment. If they found it strange to be working for a woman, they kept such thoughts to themselves after witnessing Eleanor's willingness to tackle any job, no matter how difficult or dirty. With the additional help, they completed the roundup within days, bringing the total count to nearly 100 head, far fewer than the 300 Eleanor's uncle had claimed in his letters, but enough to form the foundation of a renewed operation. "The spring calving will increase our numbers," Kyle explained as they sat around the kitchen table one evening, planning for the months ahead. "And we can sell about 20 steers this fall to cover immediate expenses." "What about Callahan?" Hank asked. He was the oldest of the new hands, with gray streaking his beard and the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. "Word in town is he's mighty upset about Miss Richards refusing his offer." Kyle's expression darkened. "He'll try again, probably escalate his tactics first." "We'll need to watch the creek," Miguel suggested. His Mexican accent was soft but distinct. "If he dams it upstream on his property, he could cut off our water legally." "Can he do that?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. "Legally, no," Kyle explained. "Water rights in the territory follow prior appropriation doctrine, first in time, first in right. Your uncle established his claim years ago, but proving Callahan diverted water would require a court battle, which costs money we don't have," Eleanor concluded. "Exactly." Kyle leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Our best defense is vigilance. 2 men on patrol at all times, especially at night." The men nodded in agreement, and Kyle began assigning shifts. Eleanor watched him, struck by how naturally leadership came to him and how readily the others accepted his authority. In the 2 weeks since her arrival, Kyle had become far more than hired help. He was her partner in this endeavor, though neither had put such a name to their relationship. Later that night, unable to sleep despite the day's exhaustion, Eleanor stepped onto the porch for fresh air. She was surprised to find Kyle there, rifle across his knees as he watched the moonlit landscape. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, settling beside him on the porch steps. "You should rest. You've been working harder than anyone." Kyle shook his head. "Someone needs to keep watch. Callahan's men will test us soon." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night alive with cricket song and the occasional coyote howl. Eleanor found herself studying Kyle's profile in the moonlight, the strong jaw now clean-shaven, a recent change she'd noticed but not commented on, the straight nose and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Why are you helping me, Kyle? Really?" she finally asked. "It can't just be because you owed my uncle a debt." He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "When I first came to the territory, I was running from some trouble back east. No one would hire me, a stranger with no references and too many questions in his past. Your uncle took me on anyway, said he judged men by what they did, not what they might have done before." Kyle's hands tightened on the rifle. "He gave me a chance when I needed one, taught me ranching, treated me like a son." "What kind of trouble were you running from?" Eleanor asked softly. Kyle's smile was sad. "The kind a foolish young man finds when he's too quick with his fists and his gun. I killed a man in a saloon fight back in Missouri. It was self-defense, but his family had influence. I had to leave or hang." Eleanor absorbed this information, surprised to find it didn't change her opinion of him. "Have you ever, since then, killed?" His voice was flat. "Yes, when I had no choice. I don't take life lightly, Eleanor. I never thought you did." She hesitated, then placed her hand over his. "Thank you for telling me." Kyle looked down at their hands, then back to her face. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might say more or perhaps even kiss her, as she'd found herself imagining with increasing frequency. Instead, he gently withdrew his hand. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Eleanor stood, oddly disappointed. "Good night, Kyle." As she turned to go, his voice stopped her. "Eleanor." When she looked back, he continued, "I'm not just helping because of your uncle, I'm helping because I believe in what you're trying to do here, and because I believe in you." The simple declaration warmed her more than any passionate words could have. "That means more to me than you know," she replied softly, before returning to the house. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm of hard work and watchful waiting. The men repaired fences, tended cattle, and patrolled the property's boundaries, while Eleanor managed the household, kept the accounts, and learned the business of ranching. Thomas continued his education under Eleanor's guidance, revealing a quick mind that absorbed knowledge eagerly. True to Kyle's prediction, Callahan's men made several attempts to sabotage the ranch, cutting fence lines, stampeding cattle, and once even firing shots at Dusty during his night patrol, though whether they intended to hit him or merely frighten him remained unclear. Each incident was met with repairs and increased vigilance, but never retaliation. Kyle insisted they maintain the moral high ground, a position Eleanor supported despite the frustration of constantly being on the defensive. Then came the day Eleanor had been dreading. Thomas burst into the house where she was making lunch, his young face flushed with alarm. "Miss Richards, the creek's barely a trickle. Miguel rode upstream and says there's a dam on Callahan's property blocking most of the water." Eleanor found Kyle in the barn, repairing a saddle. His expression hardened as she relayed Thomas's news. "This is what I was afraid of," he said, setting aside his work. "Without that creek, we can't water the herd properly, especially with summer coming. What can we do, legally? File a complaint with the territorial court. But that could take months to resolve." Kyle's jaw tightened. Callahan's counting on that. He thinks if he makes things difficult enough, you'll give up and sell. Then he doesn't know me very well, Eleanor said, anger rising. I want to see this dam for myself. Despite Kyle's protests, Eleanor insisted on riding upstream with him to inspect the barrier Callahan had constructed. It was an impressive piece of work, logs and earth piled across a narrow section of the creek, reducing the flow to a mere trickle. He's left just enough water to claim he's not completely blocking it, Kyle explained. Makes it harder to prove malicious intent in court. But this will kill our cattle if it continues, Eleanor said, dismounting to examine the construction more closely. They need water, especially in this heat. That's exactly what he's counting on. The sound of approaching horses made them both turn. Augustus Callahan and 4 of his men rode toward them, rifles prominently displayed across their saddles. Trespassing, Miss Richards. Callahan called as they approached. I believe this is my property you're standing on. You know exactly why we're here, Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her voice level. You've dammed the creek that feeds my ranch. Callahan dismounted, his boots sending up small puffs of dust as he approached. I'm merely constructing a reservoir for my cattle. If it happens to affect the downstream flow, that's unfortunate but hardly my concern. You know that's not true, Kyle interjected, stepping slightly in front of Eleanor. The water rights to Stone Creek belong to Rocking R Ranch by prior appropriation. This dam is illegal. Is it? Callahan's smile was cold. Prove it in court then. Of course, by the time a judge rules, your cattle might be rather thirsty. Eleanor fought to control her temper. What do you want, Mr. Callahan? The same thing I've wanted all along, Miss Richards, your ranch. My final offer is $20,000 more than generous given the circumstances. His gaze hardened. I suggest you take it before conditions worsen. Is that a threat? Merely an observation of natural consequences. Callahan gestured to the dam. Water's a precious resource in these parts. Without it, your operation is worthless. Eleanor glanced at Kyle, saw the barely contained fury in his eyes, and made a decision. Mr. Callahan, I'll give you 3 days to remove this dam and restore the creek's natural flow. After that, I'll be forced to take action. Callahan laughed. What action could you possibly take, Miss Richards? You're a woman alone with a handful of cowboys against my 30 men. The law is days away, and by the time they respond, it'll be too late for your cattle. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. 3 days, Mr. Callahan. Consider carefully. As they rode back to the ranch, Kyle was uncharacteristically silent. Finally, when the house came into view, he asked, What are you planning, Eleanor? You know he won't remove that dam voluntarily. No, I don't expect he will. She glanced at him. Which is why we'll have to do it ourselves. Kyle reined in his horse. That's dangerous. If Callahan's men catch us, that's why we won't all go. Eleanor had been formulating the plan during their ride back. Just you and me tonight. The others will create a distraction at the south fence line, make Callahan think we're having trouble there. Meanwhile, we'll dismantle enough of the dam to restore water flow. Kyle stared at her, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. It's risky. You have a better idea. After a moment, he shook his head. No, but I don't like putting you in danger. This is my ranch, Kyle, my fight. She urged her horse forward. I won't ask anyone to take risks I'm unwilling to take myself. That night, under cover of darkness, Eleanor and Kyle rode quietly toward the dam while Hank, Dusty, and Miguel created a commotion near Callahan's southern boundary, lighting fires and firing shots into the air as if engaged in a skirmish. The ruse worked. When they reached the dam, there were no guards in sight, all apparently drawn away by the distraction. We need to work quickly, Kyle whispered, dismounting and handing Eleanor tools from his saddlebag. Focus on the center section. If we create enough of a breach, the water pressure will do the rest. Working side by side in the darkness, they began removing logs and earth from the middle of the dam. It was hard, filthy work, but Eleanor attacked it with determination, ignoring the blisters forming on her hands and the mud soaking her clothes. After nearly an hour, water began seeping through the weakened center section with increasing force. "That's it," Kyle said, stepping back. "Time to go. This whole thing is going to give way soon." They had just mounted their horses when a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near Eleanor's mount. The horse reared in panic, nearly throwing her. "Ride," Kyle shouted, drawing his revolver and firing back toward the sound. "Head for the trees." Eleanor spurred her horse forward as more shots followed. She could hear Kyle behind her, returning fire as they galloped for the cover of the nearby pine grove. Her heart hammered in her chest, fear and exhilaration mingling as they raced through the darkness. Once within the shelter of the trees, Kyle pulled alongside her. "Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, breathless from the wild ride. "You grazed my arm, nothing serious." In the faint moonlight, Eleanor could see blood darkening his sleeve. "We need to keep moving, they'll be following." They rode hard through the night, taking a circuitous route back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, dawn was breaking and the other men were waiting anxiously in the yard. "Did you do it?" Hank asked as they dismounted. Kyle nodded. "The dam's breached. Water should be flowing freely by now." He grimaced as he swung down from his horse, the movement clearly painful. "You're hurt," Eleanor said, immediately moving to examine his arm. "It's nothing, it's not nothing. Inside now." Her tone brooked no argument. To the others she added, "Be on alert. Callahan's men will be looking for revenge." In the kitchen, Eleanor cleaned Kyle's wound, a deep graze that had taken a chunk of flesh from his upper arm, but hadn't hit anything vital. As she worked, binding the injury with clean strips of linen, she was acutely aware of his eyes on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You were remarkable tonight," he said softly. "Not many women or men, for that matter, would have had the courage to do what you did." "I just did what needed doing," she replied, securing the bandage. "As did you." His good hand caught hers as she finished. "Eleanor." The way he said her name made her look up, meeting his gaze. The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Many horses, moving fast. Kyle was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window. His expression darkened. "Callahan, and he's brought an army." Eleanor joined him at the window, her heart sinking at the sight of at least 15 riders approaching the ranch house, Callahan in the lead. Her men were already forming a defensive line in front of the house. Hank, Dusty, Miguel, and even young Thomas with a rifle almost as big as he was. "This is my fight too," she said, reaching for her uncle's shotgun mounted above the fireplace. Outside, Callahan reined in his horse, his men spreading out behind him in an intimidating display of force. "Irwin," he shouted, "send out the woman. We know you destroyed my dam." Kyle stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The rest of the Rocking R crew flanked him, weapons ready but not yet aimed. "Your dam was illegal, Callahan. The water rights belong to this ranch." "Water rights mean nothing if you're dead," Callahan snarled. "This ends today." Eleanor moved to Kyle's side, shotgun held confidently in her hands. "There's no need for bloodshed, Mr. Callahan. The territorial court will settle this matter legally." "Courts?" Callahan laughed harshly. "By the time the courts decide anything, you'll be long gone, Miss Richards." One way or another. The tension in the air was palpable, 15 armed men facing 5 defenders. Eleanor could feel Kyle tense beside her, ready to act if Callahan made a move. "Think carefully about your next action, Augustus," Kyle said, his voice carrying across the yard. "You start shooting, some of your men will die, maybe you too. You're outnumbered, Irwin. Maybe so, but how many are you willing to lose?" The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours as neither side backed down. Eleanor's hands were steady on her shotgun, but her mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the situation before blood was shed. Then, from the direction of town, came the sound of more riders approaching. All heads turned to see Sheriff Dawson leading a group of 6 men toward the ranch at a gallop. "What's going on here, Callahan?" the sheriff called as they drew near. "Looks like you're about to start a war." Callahan's expression soured. "This is a private matter, Sheriff. These people destroyed property on my land." "That's so." The sheriff, a lean man with a graying mustache, dismounted and approached the standoff. "Miss Richards, care to explain your side?" Eleanor stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan dammed Stone Creek, cutting off water to my ranch in violation of established water rights. We removed enough of the obstruction to restore flow, as is our legal right." "She's trespassed and destroyed my property," Callahan protested. "Your property was an illegal dam," Kyle countered. "The creek water rights belong to Rocking R Ranch by prior appropriation, documented in the Territorial Land Office." Sheriff Dawson nodded thoughtfully. "I'm familiar with the water rights in this county, Callahan. The lady's correct that creek's flow is protected by law." His hand rested meaningfully on his sidearm. "Now, why don't you and your men head back to your own property before this gets any uglier?" Callahan's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Richards. Not by a long shot." With a sharp gesture to his men, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his riders following close behind. As the dust settled, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you, Sheriff. Your timing was impeccable." The sheriff touched his hat. "Thank Mr. Irwin here. His telegram reached me yesterday warning that Callahan might be planning something drastic." He glanced at Kyle. "Good to see you again, Irwin. Keeping good company these days, I see." Kyle nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "The best, Sheriff. The very best." That evening, after the excitement had died down, and the sheriff had departed with promises to file official reports about Callahan's actions, the ranch hands gathered around the kitchen table for a celebratory meal. The mood was lighter than it had been in days, with even Thomas joining in the men's good-natured banter. "To Miss Richards," Hank proposed, raising his coffee cup. "Bravest boss I ever worked for." "To Miss Richards," the others echoed, and Eleanor felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment and pleasure. "I couldn't have done any of this without all of you," she said sincerely. "Especially you, Kyle." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared danger and purpose. Later, after the others had retired and Thomas had been sent to bed, Eleanor found Kyle on the porch again, keeping watch despite the sheriff's assurances that Callahan would cause no more trouble for the time being. "You should rest," she said, settling beside him on the porch swing. "Your arm needs to heal. I'm fine." But he winced slightly as he shifted to make room for her, just being cautious. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the scent of leather and soap that seemed to cling to him. "You knew," she said finally. "You anticipated Callahan would try something like damming the creek. That's why you sent that telegram to the sheriff." Kyle nodded. "I've known Augustus Callahan longer than you have. He's predictable in his tactics. Why didn't you tell me about the telegram?" didn't want you to rely on help that might not arrive in time. His good hand found hers on the swing between them. You needed to be prepared to act on your own. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. Kyle, what were you going to say this morning? Before Callahan arrived, in the lantern light, she saw color rise in his cheeks, a surprising display of vulnerability from a man who faced armed adversaries without flinching. I was going to say. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I was going to say that I admire you more than any woman I've ever known, that watching you fight for this place, for your independence, has made me see things differently. What things? Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. My life, my future. His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. I've been a drifter most of my adult life, Eleanor, moving from job to job, place to place, never letting myself get attached, but being here, working alongside you these past weeks. He squeezed her hand gently. It's made me want something more permanent. Eleanor's heart quickened. And what would that be? A home, a purpose. He hesitated, then added softly, someone to share it with. The implication hung in the air between them. Eleanor found herself leaning closer, drawn by the warmth in his eyes and the openness of his expression. Kyle, she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest, are you asking to court me? A smile touched his lips. I suppose I am, though I'm making a poor job of it. A proper Boston lady like yourself probably expects more formality. I left proper in Boston, remember. Her free hand reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw. And yes, your courtship would be welcome. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as years of loneliness and weeks of unacknowledged attraction melted away. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured, I'm not an easy man. I've lived rough, done things I'm not proud of. And I'm not an easy woman, she countered. I'm stubborn, outspoken, and determined to make this ranch succeed with or without a man's help. Kyle chuckled. I wouldn't have it any other way. In the weeks that followed, Rocking R Ranch began to transform. With the water flowing freely again, the cattle thrived. The buildings were repaired, fences mended, and under Eleanor's careful management, the ranch's finances slowly stabilized. Callahan, true to the sheriff's prediction, ceased his overt hostilities, though occasional incidents, a cut fence here, a spooked herd there, suggested he hadn't entirely abandoned his desire for the property. But with Kyle and the other hands maintaining vigilant patrols, the disruptions remained minor. Eleanor and Kyle's courtship progressed with the same determination that characterized their work on the ranch. In stolen moments between chores, they shared stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, and increasingly passionate embraces that tested the boundaries of propriety, boundaries that seemed less important with each passing day. As summer gave way to fall, the first cattle drive to market proved successful enough to pay off the most pressing debts and provide modest wages for the hands. The night after their return, with the money safely deposited in the Kingman bank, Eleanor hosted a celebration dinner for everyone who had helped make the ranch viable again. Even Sheriff Dawson attended, bringing news that the territorial court had officially ruled in favor of Rocking R regarding the water rights dispute, essentially closing that chapter of their conflict with Callahan. Don't expect him to give up entirely, the sheriff warned as he prepared to leave. Men like Augustus don't take defeat gracefully. We'll be ready, Kyle assured him, his arm protectively around Eleanor's waist. The sheriff's eyebrows rose at the open display of affection, but he merely smiled. I can see you will be. Good night, folks. After the guests had departed and Thomas was asleep, Eleanor and Kyle walked under the stars, discussing the future of the ranch and, increasingly, their future together. "Winter's coming," Kyle observed, pulling her closer against the evening chill. "We should consider bringing the herd down from the north pasture soon." Eleanor agreed, though her mind was elsewhere. "Kyle, there's something I need to ask you." He stopped walking, turning to face her with a questioning look. "What is it?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I know our courtship has been unconventional and brief by most standards, but I find myself unwilling to wait on convention." She met his gaze directly. "Will you marry me, Kyle Irwin?" His expression of shock quickly gave way to one of amusement and tenderness. "Eleanor Richards, you continue to surprise me." He took both her hands in his. "Shouldn't I be the one asking? Probably, but I've never been one to wait for others to act when I know what I want." She squeezed his hands. "And I want you, Kyle, as my husband, my partner in this ranch and in life." Kyle's laugh was warm in the cool night air. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He pulled her into his arms, sealing the agreement with a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Sheriff Dawson officiating and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Thomas stood proudly as ring bearer, his young face solemn with the responsibility. That evening, alone in the main house for the first time as husband and wife, Eleanor found herself suddenly shy despite the months of growing intimacy. Kyle seemed to sense her nervousness, approaching her with gentle hands and tender words. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured, drawing her close. "There's no rush." But the hesitation melted away with his touch, replaced by a passion that had been building since their first meeting. In the quiet of the night, they discovered each other fully at last, learning the language of each other's bodies as they had already learned the language of each other's hearts. Afterward, lying in his arms, Eleanor traced lazy patterns on his chest. "I never thought my life would take this turn when I left Boston," she mused. "I came seeking independence, not a husband." Kyle chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "And I certainly never planned on settling down when I took this job. Life has a way of surprising us." Indeed it does." She propped herself up to look at him. "Are you happy, Kyle, truly? This settled life is so different from what you've known." His hand cupped her face, thumb gently stroking her cheek. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You've given me purpose, Eleanor, a home, a future." He kissed her softly. "I'd say that's worth all the wandering years." Spring brought new life to rocking our ranch calves in the pastures, green shoots in Eleanor's newly planted garden, and the unexpected but joyful news that their family would grow by one come winter. "A baby," Kyle repeated, stunned, when Eleanor shared the doctor's confirmation. "We're having a baby." "Yes," she laughed, amused by his dazed expression. "Are you pleased?" In answer, he lifted her off her feet in a gentle but exuberant embrace. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it." Setting her down carefully, he added, "But you'll need to be more careful now. No more breaking wild horses or chasing down rustlers." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "I'm with child, not made of glass. But yes, I'll be sensible." The news of their expected child seemed to cement their place in the community. Neighboring ranchers who had been standoffish, uncertain about a female rancher from the east, now visited regularly, bringing their wives to call on Eleanor and offering Kyle assistance with seasonal work. Even Augustus Callahan, after months of sullen resistance, appeared to accept the new reality. When they encountered him in town one day, he tipped his hat to Eleanor and congratulated Kyle on the impending addition to their family. "Don't trust his sudden civility," Kyle cautioned as they drove home. "Callahan doesn't change his nature." But as the months passed without incident, even Kyle began to relax his vigilance slightly. The ranch prospered, the herd grew, and their life together settled into a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Thomas, now 11 and growing like a weed, had become Kyle's shadow, absorbing every lesson about ranching, tracking, and survival in the Arizona Territory. Under Eleanor's continued tutelage, his education progressed remarkably, and they discussed sending him to the school in Kingman once the baby arrived. "I don't want to go to town school," Thomas protested when the subject arose. "I learn more here with you and Mr. Irwin." "You need to be around other children," Eleanor explained gently, "and the new baby will need much of my attention." Thomas's expression grew serious. "Will there still be a place for me when the baby comes?" Kyle ruffled the boy's hair. "There will always be a place for you here, Thomas. Your family." The boy's smile could have lit the night sky. In late November, as the first winter chills settled over the land, Eleanor went into labor. The birth was difficult, long hours of pain that tested her endurance and left Kyle pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while the doctor and a neighboring rancher's wife attended her. "You've got a son, Mr. Irwin," the doctor announced finally, emerging from the room with a tired smile. "And your wife is asking for you." Kyle found Eleanor pale but triumphant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Meet your son," she said softly as he approached the bed. "Richard Kyle Irwin, after my uncle and his father." Kyle's hands trembled as he took the infant, marveling at the tiny features and perfect fingers. "He's beautiful," he whispered, overcome with emotion, "just like his mother." Their son's arrival completed the transformation of Rocking R Ranch from Eleanor's inheritance to their family legacy. As winter gave way to spring again, and little Richard began to grow and thrive, they discussed their plans for the future, expanding the herd, improving the buildings, perhaps even buying additional land. "We should consider getting some horses to raise," Kyle suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas teach the ranch's dogs new tricks while the baby slept in Eleanor's arms. "Good bloodstock can bring a fine price." "Horses," Eleanor mused. "They're more trouble than cattle, aren't they?" Kyle smiled. "They are, stubborn, headstrong creatures." His eyes twinkled. "Remind me of someone I know," she laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I suppose I deserved that." "They only listen to their mother," Kyle added, watching as one of the dogs ignored Thomas's command to sit. Eleanor smiled, glancing down at their sleeping son. "Then I'll speak soft like she did," she whispered, brushing a kiss against the baby's downy head. Kyle's arm tightened around her shoulders. "You know, when I first met you standing in that Kingman street with bullets flying, I never imagined we'd end up here." "No," she looked up at him, amusement in her eyes. "I seemed so incapable, on the contrary." His voice grew serious. "You seemed too capable, too independent to need someone like me." Eleanor shifted the baby to rest against her shoulder, freeing one hand to touch Kyle's face. "I didn't need you, Kyle. That's what makes this so precious. I chose you. We chose each other." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Kyle kissed his wife. Their son nestled between them and their future stretching out before them like the vast Arizona landscape, wild, challenging, and beautiful beyond measure. In the years that followed, Rocking R Ranch grew into one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. Eleanor and Kyle welcomed a daughter, Sophia, 2 years after Richard's birth, and their family was complete. Thomas remained with them, growing into a fine young man who eventually took over management of the horse breeding program Kyle had started. His natural way with the animals and sharp business sense made it a remarkable success. Augustus Callahan, true to Kyle's prediction, never entirely abandoned his designs on the water rights, but his attempts grew increasingly feeble and infrequent as the Irwins' position in the community strengthened. When he finally passed away in 1895, his sons made peace with their neighbors, establishing a relationship based on mutual respect rather than antagonism. Through droughts and floods, boom years and lean ones, Eleanor and Kyle faced every challenge together, their bond deepening with each passing season. The ranch bore witness to their love story in the expanding buildings, the thriving herds, and most of all, in the family they created together. And on quiet evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, they would still sit on that same porch swing, watching the stars emerge over land that had become an inseparable part of their shared identity. "You ever regret it?" Kyle would sometimes ask. "Leaving Boston? Taking on this life?" And Eleanor would always answer the same way, taking his weathered hand in hers, "Not for a single moment." For in the wilds of the Arizona Territory, Eleanor Richards had found not just independence and purpose, but a love as vast and enduring as the desert sky, a love that had begun with bullets and a dam, with soft words and hard work, with a cowboy and a city woman who discovered they were stronger together than apart.